Hello, folks. I'm Timothy Adon. I do game audio and stuff, and today I'm going to be talking about integrating Wwise into Unreal, and just integrating audio directly into Unreal if you didn't want to use Wwise, and talk about the comparing how the two of them work, the upsides and downsides of both, because there definitely are downsides to using Wwise other than money. So first, a list of games that use Wwise. Some of them kind of surprised me, like Jurassic World Evolution kind of surprised me a little bit. Void Bastards surprised me a little bit as well. Dang it. On that last screen was Long Dark, which is a really good Unity example of a game that uses Wwise. And then here are games that use both Wwise and Unreal, which again, Mortal Kombat kind of surprised me, mostly because I feel like they would have had their own internal thing instead. So the way that I have this talk structured, I have two versions of a project created, complete duplicates in every way except one of them has the audio integrated in it using just Unreal, and the other one is using Wwise. Almost all of the work has already been done, so for the most part I'm not going to be doing any live scripting, unlike all the other cool people here that have done talks involving scripting, with one exception being music. Music, I will be doing just like the tiniest bit of live scripting. And all the scripting I'm going to be doing is going to be using blueprints, not C++. And this will be the list of things I'll be talking about. So first, implementing a basic sound. This part, very, very easy. Both projects are very similar in how they will integrate their audio, and Wwise didn't open. Hold on. Do the thing. There you go. Project Starter is already up. Technical difficulties? No, it was open. I was just being dumb. Okay. This one. Okay, so basic implementation of a sound in Unreal is thankfully very painless. You just drag and drop your audio in here and you create what is called a sound cue. And inside the sound cue is just going to be more blueprinting for anybody that knows what blueprinting looks like. Come on. My computer is going to behave a little awkwardly given that it's not meant to be running all these things at the same time. So it is a matter of hooking together all of these nodes into more nodes. If any of you are not familiar with blueprints, basically this is essentially what it looks like. You take nodes that refer to a specific kind of code, and then you hook it into other things in order to make everything go. It's my favorite way of scripting because I like the visual representation. And so what we have here are three different layers of my blaster sound effect, which is essentially is the high sounds, the low sounds, and the middle sounds, hooked into these random nodes that'll randomly pick from each of these with a random pitch shift attached to each of them into a mixer that mixes down all three into the output. Done. I'm gonna say that's simple. I understand that for some of you that's probably not the case, but trust me, it's easy once you get to know it. I don't need that. And then once you get into the actual blueprints for getting the sound to go, it's just a matter of getting into the folder, if it'll open. And telling it to play a sound. You just need the sound attached to the character, tell it to play the sound, and then it'll go bang. Except when it decides to crash.
Typical.
Yeah, exactly. There we go.
Is there a way to put that through the...
That is a very good question. Actually, let's find out. Projector.
Do you mind questions?
Do you mind questions, or do you want to take it at the end?
No, I'll take questions now.
Are you applying a randomized frequency variation in that?
There is a slight bit of random pitch
Sorry.
to each of the layers of the blaster sound.
Okay. There are multiple layers in that.
Yeah, there are 3 layers.
Oh.
There's a high, middle, and a low. Same thing in Wwise. So in Wwise, all of the implementation happens in this interface, or almost all of the implementation happens in this interface. Go up to the sound effects here. And so that same gunshot, I'm actually using a different gunshot for this. I'm using actual gunshots instead of the blaster sounds I created. And you'll see why in a little bit. But so if it'll go, come on. So one of the cool things about Wwise already is that I can preview things very nicely in here. Like, you can preview them in Unreal, but unlike in Unreal, it's way, way easier to handle. Where am I? To handle any quick changes that I need to make to volume. All of that information is right here. I can make changes to pitch. I can randomize it from right here, which I actually didn't even do. So randomization here is just a matter of enabling a randomizer, selecting the values, which is the same thing, just doing it in Unreal. It requires a couple extra steps in Wwise, so that is kind of a downside, is that there are a few extra steps to some of the things here. But once I save and get into here, and then into the blueprint, it is right here. Right? Am I looking at the right thing? Nope, I'm looking at footsteps. There we go. Right there, post event. And that is the gunshot for this. And same thing, little bits of pitch shifting, randomization between 3 different layers of sound. And in this case, basic implementation takes a little bit less time in Unreal. If you're just doing something like putting in basic sounds and a few other basic things, Unreal will be a lot faster in order to do it. Just not as much control, which I will get to in a little bit. So on the subject of control, I'm not going to do the actual presentation for this. Going on to switches. Switches are a way for you to, exactly how it sounds, switch from one type of sound to another based on certain parameters. The most common use of this would be footsteps. Footsteps for different materials that you end up walking on. So in order to switch from sounds, say from concrete to grass to dirt to whatever material you happen to be walking on, anytime the sound changes, that is a switch. Or is a switch in Wwise. Occasionally it's a switch in Unreal. And in Unreal, switches don't work all of the time, and sometimes you have to do some weird workarounds for it. Still, for the most part, pretty simple to do in the case of the footsteps that I will show off in just a second. The problems that I ran into... Well, actually, before I get into the problems, let me just show you how Wwise handles this. In Wwise, you create a game sync, you create the switches and add all of your different switch nodes in there, and then you have a switch group where you contain all of your sound effects that are going to be under that switch, and you just simply assign them to the switches as necessary over here. Once that switch notify is sent, it just, Wwise will make the switch on its own and you're all set. It's actually way easier to do this in Wwise than it is in Unreal, because once you have that set up, and you have your animation notifying when the sound is supposed to be played. It just requires this set switch node. A couple other things. It needs the surface type, and it needs to know where the audio is being played. But then after that, you just set the switch, and Wwise will start playing the switched materials for you. Brick doesn't have anything. All of that using line traces, which I think is ray casting in Unity, I believe, if I remember my terminology correctly.
Really? They call it line casting.
They call it line tracing.
Ray casting would be the term in probably almost every single other 3D application.
Oh, that's interesting.
Universal.
Ray casting?
No,
Yeah.
for
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. Ray trace. Yeah, ray trace.
yeah, and here it's line tracing.
Ray trace. Yeah, it is.
I haven't played around with the Unity enough to know.
It's not just Unity. Code, everything. It's just a ray cast.
Interesting. In Unreal, I actually had to go and use animation blueprints to make the footsteps work. For some reason, there's no way to get the audio components that are attached to the mesh and have it do an actual switch. So instead of using the switches, which Unreal does have, Unreal has switches that you can use. Can't use it in Unreal for footsteps. Instead, I had to go into the animation blueprint and have it use a selector node, which just has a direct reference to each of the footstep sounds, and basically tell it to manually play each sound based on then the foot material. It was doing it more manually. It was like making a switch, but doing it manually, as opposed to just having Wwise do it myself.
Do it
itself.
Is that because they maybe have a system hard-coded into their player entity that deals with that versus letting you offer your own interactions?
What do you mean?
I'm used to Unreal being so focused on first-person, third-person action games that they, for a very long time, many of the features in the engine were not accessible to developers, and they've been opening it up over the last 10 years.
Right. Well, yeah, that's basically there is a way to do more audio manipulation in Unreal, and I was going to talk about that a little later, but it's not officially available. It's like a version of their engine that you can't get through their launcher. You have to download it and then build it through GitHub instead. But I haven't actually tried that version of it yet. But they offer like a lot more control over their audio with that version of Unreal.
So maybe they just haven't got there yet. I was just wondering if that was like an inbuilt limitation of the engine just by nature of what they used to focus on versus what they're opening up to now.
Their Epic's lead audio person has been pushing to get more audio stuff in just base Unreal because so many people are using other things instead.
Yeah.
That they're trying to make it better, and it's slowly getting there.
Sure.
But still not very much in the way of control. However, even so, it still works just fine. Yeah. Assuming you can hear it.
Turn it up maybe just a little bit.
I think I'm at max.
You got the power right to your left hand.
I have the power. Yes. Oh.
There you go.
Now I'm really curious. Hold on.
Oh god.
We're gonna turn that back to... There we go. Okay.
You were on 6 right before that, so you put it up to 8. So I put it up 2 more, 2 ticks more.
What?
The 7.
Because you're back down to 5,
Oh.
so I put it back. Probably get there.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Any questions on switches before I move on? Okay. Okay. States is another weird one. So Unreal, and back on the topic of not having control over your audio, Unreal makes it really, really hard to modify specific groups of sounds, and it makes it really hard to reach like their master audio bus, or any buses for that matter. You can do it, but they make it really hard to control them. And there are some other things. The example that I'm going to be using is water. And the thing that Unreal does do that is very, very cool is have audio volumes that you can place in the level. And audio volumes are what you use for both your reverbs and any other weird effect that you want. So in this case, I have this random pool of water that I created in here, which as long as I'm in here, has a low-pass filter on it to attempt to simulate being underwater. And so they have really good workarounds for certain things, but there are other reasons that you would want states that make it really hard to manipulate the audio in the way that you would necessarily want. And I'm going to go a little bit more into states when I start talking about music. But in Wwise, the states in Wwise work very similarly to switches. You create the group, you create each state node. So in this case, I've got combat states, and then base state, combat, dead, stealth, and then states for water, submerged and versus not submerged. And you can apply these states to any individual audio object that you want, and then assign, let's actually take a look. So we're on footsteps. So let's look at that. We can go to states right here. We can add combat states. And so based on state, you can change your volume, your pitch, your low pass filters, your high pass filters, and put up whatever makeup gain that you want on those based on state. And then each state will have its own transition time or interpolation time, so that when the state happens, it'll fade in or out those changes over half a second, 1 second, 10 seconds, whatever you want. And you can do that individually for every single audio object in Wwise, independently or in groups, which is just, it's so insanely easy, and it's really cool how that works out. Just for the sake of comparison. And I have to it won't let me activate anything unless I start clicking buttons, so that's why I have to fire at the start.
Blub blub underwater.
Blub blub underwater. RTPCs, real-time parameter controls. This is essentially anything that usually uses a numeric system for tracking information. So like, say, hit points, or in my personal project that I've been working on, audience approval rating and audience excitement I have as numeric values that change drastically over the course of time. You can then use to modify parameters in games. This is another one where Unreal, because it has very little control, you can control volume and pitch of individual objects, but it's clunky and not particularly easy to use. And unfortunately, I do not have a good Unreal example for this because of the fact that it was clunky and I didn't have time to put it together. But in Wwise, that is another thing, kind of like states, where you can set this up for any individual object to set with any variable. And setting RTPCs, yes. This one is another node. Setting states is just a set state node, kind of like setting switches. You just put a set state, put the names of the state group and the state that you're switching to, and it does the rest. No insane setups or anything like that. Where am I? There we go. Oh, I don't know where it is. There we go. Hallway. In here, I have an object set up to get the distance to the player, and then based on that distance to the player, it sends the float value to the RTPC, and then every frame it updates the RTPC value, which I'll be showing you in a second when I deal with reverbs and controlling reverb parameters in real time. This is something that you can do with some aspects in Unreal, and it's not even all that hard to do. I just couldn't do it because it was going to take longer. But the level of control that you have with Wwise is you can control each individual effect. So like the reverb, so let's actually go and do that. So right here, we have and then that doesn't have a texture. Where am I sitting again? Except in this case, it seems to not be wanting to be working, or I just can't hear it. I can't tell. But the way that this is supposed to work is I have an object hiding right at the edge of that hallway, and what it's supposed to be doing, but I can't, it doesn't seem like it's doing it right now, is reducing, well,
A little further back.
I hear
okay. Yeah, I can't hear it from here, so I have no idea. Is it's supposed to be reducing the decay time based on how far away, like the distance you are from the object at the end of the hallway. And because you can set up your own custom curves in RTPCs, I have it so that when you are in the middle of the hallway, the decay time is the longest, and then when you're at either end of the hallway, the decay time is the shortest. Should probably be in reverse, but...
Is there anything in this that's occluding the audio?
Occlusion is something I'm going to be talking about in a second.
But it's not used in this environment?
What do you mean?
Well, you walk into a hall in an indoor environment. I'm wondering if you had contained the audio volume within that space, or if another viewer was just outside of the doorway.
I have a thing set up just for that in just a second.
Okay, just curious.
And setting RTPC, so I showed you the blueprint, and that's another game sync that is right. Is it game sync or is it? Yeah, game sync. Switches, states, game parameters. There we go. Hallway room depth, which you can set your minimum and maximum values. And then right here I have the hallway reverb, which is a bus that then has this reverb effect on it, which then has, oh, well that might be why it's not working. Small tiled room 1. Is that I have no RTPC set up here.
What does RTP stand for?
Real-time parameter control. But, so we go here, I would say reverb time, and then pick my game parameter, and then from there I can set up my curve. Yes.
Sorry, real-time parameter
Control.
That's controlling anything that's like a spatial 3D spatial audio, right?
Right. So anything that is controlled in real time that you can set up. So in this case, I now have my curve set up based on distance. Theoretically, this would work.
Where is the hallway depth parameter?
Oh, that.
There.
So right here are actually all of the effect settings, and this is probably one of my complaints about Wwise is that the effects that come built in are not.
A little buried.
What's that?
A little buried.
No, they're not buried. They just don't look good, and there's not like. Despite all of the control that you have with Wwise, each individual effect doesn't have too many controls to them, which, being somebody that works in audio a lot and works with a lot of third-party plugins that like you can control what shoe size the person that designed the software is wearing. This is just a little light for my tastes, but you still have a lot of control with it, so it's super cool.
But where does that name come from? Room depth. Where did that
Which one?
the room depth parameter name?
Oh, the parameter name. That was my.
You gave it.
Yeah,
that
the
name.
hallway room depth. So that was the that is the parameter that I created over here in GameSyncs.
Okay.
So
Right.
hallway room depth. That is the name of the parameter, and I could create another one in here if I wanted to.
Cool.
Just call it player health, and then set that. Actually, 0 to 100 is perfect with a default of 100, and there we go. Now I have a parameter for player health, which if I hooked up the player's health in the game, I can then control whatever audio I wanted with that. Where are we at on time? Okay, I've been doing this for a while. We're going to move on. Reverbs, we were just talking about this. So Unreal, it's way easier to set up reverb in Unreal. It's actually just insanely much easier to set up in Unreal Volume in Unreal. The only problem is you have no control over it once it's set up. Which, if you are making a very basic like arena shooter, Fortnite is an example that comes to mind, you really don't need any control over it. And so that is perfectly fine. You can still get some really decent reverbs out of the tools that they have in Unreal. Wwise, the reverbs are... as I was just talking about, like the parameters that you can control are very handy to control, but there's not a lot to them until you start buying their extra plugins, which are very, very pricey, and we'll talk about pricing in a little bit. And like insanely cool, don't get me wrong, I got to play around with some of them because they're very, very nice and they'll let you play around with their plugins as long as you're not making any money off of it. But unless you get those third-party plugins, the stuff that you get is kind of okay. But the cool thing that you do get out of it that I completely forgot to talk about is and that's where I was going to talk about occlusion as well. Occlusion is both seriously cool and also partially bad in Wwise. But the reverbs, you can blend reverbs together based on the position of a sound, and this kind of leads into the occlusion bit. So we're gonna go into this big room. Sorry. So over here, and actually this little ball is a test render of what will happen with audio occlusion. So in Wwise you can set things up as rooms. And then you can create portals that connect those rooms, and those portals basically act as mixers for audio that is being played inside or outside of a particular room. And so when a sound gets played, if the door has line of sight to the sound that is being played, the door will remix it at that location and then play it to people that have sight of that. And if there happens to be another door, that door will then play a copy of that sound based on like all of the mixing materials that happened in the meantime. So in this big room, I have a big reverb in this big chamber here, and then right here, although you can't see it, is an acoustic portal that is connecting that to this little entryway, and then another acoustic portal that's going here. And so inside is a gunshot sound that I have playing. And basically what's happening is it plays in the big chamber where the reverb affects it. The reverb affects it, the acoustic portal captures that sound, and then plays it in the next room, which has its own reverb, mixes it with that new reverb, and then plays it from the acoustic portal that is right here in front of me. And then if I go in here, and then right here, now it's just got the one reverb because I'm right next to it.
Does it have the decay as well Does it have the decay as well of the sound being
I guess, weakening as it comes outside through the other.
So if I go further out, so that's the attenuation settings,
Yeah.
which I also have set up. And if I go, sorry, it's really loud.
That's okay.
Hold on, let me turn this down.
It's just the footsteps that were quiet.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I actually didn't realize I had the attenuation that far out, which we can look at, because you can preview the attenuation settings.
You're fine.
There it is. The attenuation dome. So that you can see where the maximum distance is for the attenuation settings that you have set up in Wwise at that point. If I were to make the changes in Wwise to these attenuation settings and then saved it, it will automatically update this in Unreal. Kreth, did you have more specific questions on occlusion? No? Okay.
No, I was just curious if you used it for that particular demo.
Yes.
It's really cool to see how it works.
Were you here when I talked about the acoustic portals and how it remixes the sounds?
Just now, yeah,
Okay,
I did.
cool.
When Jerry Boulangeri was here doing his talk, I told him about the implementation I had written for my own projects, which is exactly how that works, like, but only to the first degree, where it's like doing the line of sight. Didn't do any calculation with reverb through different spaces, which is awesome. Didn't even think of that. I don't know. I'm a
Right.
visual artist. I was just happy that I was able to conceive something sound based. But no, not at all. This is awesome.
Downsides, it does take it does take more time to set up, and it does this weird thing. It didn't do it this time, showing it to everybody, but it occasionally does this weird thing where when you cross from one reverb zone to another reverb zone, there are some really weird artifacts that kind of occur, and sometimes the sounds will just drop out, like if you cross reverb zones. And that's not something that I have figured out why it chooses to do that, and it now befuddles me that it decided not to do it this time. So occasionally there are those issues. I imagine they are fixable. As for doing that in Unreal, I don't know how to do that. And I'm very, very certain that you can set up blending reverbs in Unreal. It would just take a lot of blueprints. That's how you would also have to set up occlusion in Unreal. Like, it doesn't work out of the box. You would need to set it up specifically, at least as far as what I've seen thus far. Yes. Am I wrong?
Have you tried the advanced audio plugin?
No. Did you... earlier I mentioned that they had like a separate version of Unreal.
Not the builds, just a plugin. What version of Unreal are you on?
4.22?
Yeah, if you go into plugins and you go into the audio, I think there's a few audio plugins you can enable, and you can have sound effect classes that you can attach to things.
Okay, that's very cool then. I was poking around the Unreal website and
It's not
there wasn't
very
really much
documented.
about that. Yeah, okay. That's good to know.
It's
That's
a
good to know
little
that
mysterious,
exists.
But I think it does some of this stuff.
Okay, well I'll have to take a look at that for when I decide to do version 2 of this talk. Because I couldn't find that, and I was looking, just like there were some things I was looking for Wwise specifically, and there was no documentation on it whatsoever.
They even have multiple synthesizers. You can parameterize.
Occlusion, out of the box, neither works particularly well. We already talked about the room volumes and door stuff. The biggest thing that I want to mention about this is that at least Audio Kinetic on their website says that it takes less resources to do occlusion with rooms and acoustic portals than it does to just do it straight in a game engine, but with coding. I can't say much to that one way or the other because I don't know as much about how CPU resources work. But that is something that I feel like people should be aware of, is that they try to make it not only easy easy to work with without any prior coding, but they also make it less resource intensive. Music. This is the part where I don't have everything set up, and I did that on purpose so that I could show you some coding. In Unreal, interactive music, barring there being any plugins that I don't know about, takes a really long time to set up, and you have very, very little control of it when it happens, and theoretically takes up a lot of CPU resources if you want to make it good. From what I can tell, and I don't have anything in Unreal set up for this, is in order to have like a decent arrangement of interactive music, you basically need everything to be playing at the same time, just muted. Like all of your audio needs to be playing, but muted, and then you control the volumes of those things so that you can crossfade them in and out when you need your music stems to change, which is workable, but that means that you're having all of your music playing at the same time all the time, and that just seems woefully inefficient. And I know that there are other ways, or I have seen on their website that there are other ways to make it work, but they don't make it easy to figure that out. And that's definitely one of the downsides that I see to this. However, with that being said, Wwise doesn't make it easy either. You have so much more control over how audio works, or over how music plays in Wwise. And that's probably, I almost feel like, their main selling point is how much stuff you can do with their interactive music. But it has a learning curve to it. It has quite the unlike everything else I feel like is very, once you kind of know where things are, it's very easy to set up. Every time I do interactive music, I have to look it up again because I don't quite, there's a lot to it. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at that. Here, nope, not there. Here is my interactive music in all of these folders that I'm going to shrink really quick. So down here, I just have the main theme, and I have 3 different transitions that are separate. And then under main theme, I have my 4 states: bass, combat, dead, and stealth.
Could you sample them at all?
Yeah. Here is this is all the music that I've been using in my personal project too. So here's stealth. And here's combat. But then underneath each of these are so each of these is what is called a playlist container, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It is a container that contains a playlist of music, probably, most likely. And then within each of these are tracks, and right now it doesn't look like there's too many tracks. And I need to look at view. No, stop that. Stop it. Use music editor. So within each of these, this one in particular, and this is going to be where it starts to look pretty cool. This is the bass music. And the way that this is set up is there are 2 tracks. There is the intro. It plays it once, and then it immediately moves on to, ignore the naming conventions, please. Moves on to what is the main music theme, and then it plays it infinitely. It'll just keep on looping it until something tells it to stop. And it'll never go back to this intro again unless the music stops entirely and then resumes again. And then we have the combat theme. We have the dead theme, which then has random step. It'll randomly play one of these 3 tracks. And then stealth just plays through this. But within each of these are all of the stems for each of the individual instruments, which you can then set up to be grouped up based on which instrument it is, based on what section it's playing, and then have set up to be either played sequentially, played randomly, also individually have their volumes controlled. also individually be controlled by states, be controlled by switches. And then also have the beginning and end of each stem with reverb tails at the end of it. And this is part of why I didn't get music done for Unreal, was I didn't have anything written specifically that would function in it. Because if you leave the reverb tails on, it'll play the reverb tails for the track until the reverb tail is done while the next stem is playing, so that it sounds as natural as possible when the loop loops through again. So as an example, we're gonna go ahead and play. We're gonna go ahead and play this. Well, it's not going to loop it because I played it from the wrong point. But
I felt it
where was I? What was the next point I was going to do for this? Oh, right, setting up the rest of the things in here. So again, I don't have anything set up in Unreal, but I can set this up, finish setting this up in here in Blueprints. So right now, I have the music sitting in here somewhere, I think. And I have all these combat states set up. So what we're gonna do is set, oops, that is not what I wanted at all. Set state. And then I call that combat states, which I'm just gonna copy from there. Be base.
This is the first time I've seen Blueprints.
I really like Blueprints, and I know that
they're
they're.
talk about Blueprints.
What's that?
Would you be willing to talk about Blueprints?
Potentially. I still am less comfortable coding, but I could be convinced to do a talk about Blueprints because I really like Blueprints.
Having an artist do a talk about visual scripting and an audio guy doing a talk about visual scripting could be pretty interesting in itself.
Okay, I could do that. Yeah.
I can maybe talk about it.
And I know that there is a visual scripting plugin you can do for Unity, but I've seen what it looks like, and I much prefer this because it looks really nice.
Hey.
What?
I feel like Kreth would prefer anything over Playmaker too.
No, that's not true.
I'm Playmaker. Does everybody know what Tim's kind of doing? Or, sorry, what Blueprints is?
Does anybody need an explanation of this before I can go too much further, or while I do this?
I've never heard of it, but is it a drag and drop version of the coding?
Yes. Yeah, it is. It is the built-in visual scripting editor in Unreal. I don't know of any examples of commercial games that have used it entirely, but
They just
they're
released
out there.
one free on the Epic Store. The one that's not Celeste is apparently, or no, they had they have an article about some game that just came out with only Blueprints.
Yeah, there are a lot of projects that have been published, including some of mine, that are entirely Playmaker.
Was Celeste in Unreal?
No.
It's
It's just the one that's not
Celeste.
Celeste.
Like, what's Celeste?
Celeste was Unreal.
And then we're going to
Or,
try
I mean,
this.
excuse me, Celeste was Unity.
Get a reference to that.
I was going to say, I'd like my project to be known as the one that's not Celeste.
And actually, you know what? We're just going to go ahead and do this on play. And post event.
While you're setting this up, when you were doing the walkthrough earlier of the room reflections,
Mm-hmm.
and you had this little rhythm pattern going with the footsteps. I thought it'd be awesome if somebody did a West Side Story first-person shooter.
Oh my god!
Or stabber. I don't know.
Where you have to
through,
dance at the bad guys.
Yeah.
That would be
You
awesome.
have just rhythmic chain swinging when you're
Yeah.
walking along.
So you can remember what all the inputs
That's how
are.
you get out of debugging for.
Yeah, you're snapping while you walk.
Dance
Really?
really.
Sync to audio like that.
That's dancing.
Call it
Jamming
jamming.
on the beat.
Okay,
Pretty good.
so theoretically, no, of course not. Always with the coding. So instead, we're just gonna be a little bit smarter
give
about
up.
this.
Don't give up.
No, not giving up. I'm gonna be a little smarter about it. I'm gonna just create a new blueprint because that'll just be the more guaranteed way to make this work. Blueprint, music. Come on, come on. There you go. And then play the main theme. It's gonna go right there. And then in here, I just need an event begin play. I'm gonna post event. Main theme, and actor is self. Boom, boom. And I just need to make sure that I actually put this out here. There we go. Oh, and probably generate sound banks. Other downside, always having to remember to generate my sound banks. There we go.
What?
So that is basically like initializing the sounds. If I made any changes in Wwise, you have to build the sound banks in Unreal in order to kind of reinitialize everything. Excuse me. Oh, I bet I don't have the state set up right. So hold on, it actually might be working. There it is. So that's the intro. Okay, I have two copies of it playing now. That's okay. Oh my god, okay, no, that's too annoying. Hold on. Sorry, folks.
I was into it.
I'm just gonna
It's gonna be the biggest problem with testing
Kill-
games is
kill that.
Over. Basically, last CD mounts
So we're gonna let it play through the intro. We're gonna let it loop through the bass theme once, and then I'm gonna change the state so that you can hear what it sounds like. And that's the dead state.
That's nice.
So one of the really cool things about doing this with music is that when you have your states set up properly, you can then do all kinds of different transitions with music, which is again a kind of a difficulty with that as far as I know, with Unreal, in that Wwise tracks your bars and tracks the tempo of the music that's currently playing, so that it can accurately transition your music stems from state to state. And then you can, in the middle of that, go over to here.
Is
Go
that the
over
same
to
in that it will initiate transitions at like, I don't know, specific times, like the end of the measure?
exactly. So I had once the first loop started, I had immediately told it to switch over to a different state, and then it waited until the end of the stem. Or the exit cue, as they call it, before it moved over to the next one. But you can have it set up in any way that you want. So right now, any state to dead it'll transition at the next beat, and then it'll play the dead state. And then in addition, you can set up a different transition for every single state change. You can set up a different transition, which will then play the entry cue to the transition, and then once it hits the middle, the middle of the transition syncs up with the change of state, and then the end of the transition along with the stem will play for the rest. It's just like a seriously cool way to have all of this set up.
Is it possible to change the transition, or like what transition plays, depending on like where in a loop it triggers?
Absolutely. So
if you wanted to have like, I don't know, a natural sounding musical transition from one state to another, and you were crazy enough to write a bunch of different transitions to do that,
you could, absolutely. So it's the base is you have next cue, or the exit cue, next grid, next bar, next beat, and you can also in each of these sections put in custom cues, which you can then also have the transitions cue off of. So if I go back to the music editor and look in, come on. Oh, that's the multi-editor, not the music editor. Come on, eyesight, don't fail me. There we go. So if I right-click here, I can add a custom cue. And then I did that right down the middle. And we are right there, and we're in the bass. So sure, let's just quickly test this. And then I'll probably quickly move on because... Nope. Well, it didn't work that time, but it should work.
We believe you.
Oh, and you know what? It's probably because I had the transition set up wrong. But yes, it does work. It does exist. And you can even set up different destinations for where to end up going with those if you really wanted to. There's just a lot of ways that you could do this, and I really love it. I love it so much. If you can't tell, and I'm gonna say this right now, I am a little biased towards Wwise. I have way more fun in implementing audio in Wwise than I did in Unreal, and there's just so many more things that you can do with it, and I still haven't really hit into it. And that's not even counting the fact that you can get access to the source code and start doing, and if you're a coder, start doing things that, with Wwise that doesn't even come built into it. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. CPU resources. I don't know how to talk about this. I know that it's something that's super important, and I really wanted to learn more about it. Unfortunately, Wwise doesn't have very much information regarding CPU resources on their website. They talk a lot about how to save CPU resources, but not any comparisons as to how much it takes when compared to just using built-in engine stuff. They have a ton of tools for how to keep CPU resources low. Specifically, like all of their effects have a quality slider on them, like a sound quality slider on them, that lowers the quality of the sound that the effect puts through in order to save on resources. It also has audio conversion settings so that you can change what file format all of your audio is converted to, because different file formats read faster than other ones. And they have a lot, and the Wwise Profiler, which is a built-in way to track CPU usage and voice plays in real time while the project is playing, is a really good way to monitor what is happening in your project, which they have a version of that in Unreal, but it's entirely text-based. Like they have a debug logger for audio in Unreal. I haven't tried using it though, so I can't say much on that. And then back on the thing about Occlusion, where their version of Occlusion supposedly takes up less resources than built-in engine resources do, but that's literally the only thing they say about what's more efficient on their end as opposed to using like just Unreal audio or just Unity audio. So not much that I can say about that. Hopefully I'll figure out more in the future. Pricing, because that's a very important thing to talk about if we're going to talk about Wwise. It's free if you want to just play with it. And that's what I've been doing. I've been using the free version, and as long as you're doing things not commercial at all, you can also get access to a lot of their extra tools that usually costs money to get. They're super duper nice about letting you play with their tools, as long as you're not making money off of it. So if you want to play around with it, absolutely go do that, because it's super cool, and I really like their 3D audio plugins. Other than that, if you are making something commercial, it's still free as long as your budget is under 150 grand. I have no reference for how much money that is when it comes to game development, but you are limited to 500 sounds. You cannot get any of their plugins, and you also have extremely limited technical support. Like, extremely limited.
So that would be like the entire game project budget would be
Right, the entire game project budget being 150 grand. It costs $750. I believe this is per instance of Wwise you are using. If you're
saying per instance.
Per seat?
Mean like
per like computer,
computer?
So per seat.
yeah, thank you. I didn't hear it the first time when you said per seat. It sounded like something different in my head. Limited budget of $1.5 million. You can also optionally pay 1% of your gross royalties to them instead of paying the $750. I don't know all of the details on that, but they advertise that. Unlimited sounds, access to the source code, optional purchase of their extra plugins, optional payment plans for their support for their engineering team in case you needed to do something funky. And then for $18,000, you have unlimited budget, unlimited sounds. It comes with some support. It's basically like if you're a really, really, really big company like Blizzard, because Overwatch was on the list of things that uses Wwise.
Is that 18,000 per seat?
18,000 per seat, or more. They have customized plans as well if you need to make something that fits your company. All right, conclusion. Unreal, if you are doing something very basic, you just need sounds to go, and you just need basic reverbs, and you don't care if you have too much control, Unreal is perfectly reasonable. And honestly, I feel like that it would be way easier if I knew more about how... if I hadn't played so much with Wwise, I would probably know more about how Unreal works. But because I play so much with Wwise, that's not necessarily the case. It's very easy to put together. Blueprints are fun if you're into visual scripting. It comes with Unreal, so you don't have to pay for it. Aside from like...
No, Unreal comes
No,
with
Unreal comes with Unreal. So if you're just implementing audio in Unreal, it's basically free.
I fall asleep again.
No, I think I just said it wrong. I think you're good. You're fine. Wwise takes time to set up. Like the way that they have it so that you can implement it as a plugin, and I didn't even go into that, is it scans your computer for what projects you have, and then you just hit this integrate button, and then it in like 15 minutes it has it set up on your engine as a plugin.
What are you working with Ezra on? What are you working with Ezra on?
Oh, that was Ezra that you introduced me to. It was a student. It was a student project.
Ezra Cove?
I don't know the last name.
Cool.
It's the student that you introduced me to before.
Oh, not the same Ezra. Different
Okay.
Ezra. That's awesome. They said thank you, by the way. Really big next time I saw them. Go ahead.
Oh, yay. Amazing level of control. Like, insane level of control, if that's what you're looking for. It can be buggy. I mean, you're adding another piece of software onto already buggy software. So, it's going to be buggy. It can cost an arm and a leg if your budget is high and you're looking to make money. And my personal take is that it's just way more fun to implement things in here than it is in Unreal. I did not enjoy putting audio in Unreal for this. Whereas when I got to working on the Wwise portion of it, is like, doop, 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 I'm going to do these things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Questions?
I got one question.
Yes.
So you were talking about It sounded like, and this is at the very beginning, you were using 3 audio samples for one effect, and you had implied that there was some randomization applied to that.
Yes.
So the example you were showing was of a gunshot, and in my mind, I can imagine that being like the combustion, the impact, and the ignition of it, right? So start, middle, end, roughly.
Right. So here's.
That's my assumption. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know going back a ways, we started splitting up audio clips so that it was every component involved in a particular audio-based interaction was represented individually. So if you had a footstep, if you had a person walking across a wood bridge, you would have the sound of the foot and then the sound of a thud on a wood surface, right?
Okay.
So you play those at the same time. And then if you had a sound of a person walking across a metal platform, you could reuse some of those elements and combine them with the more metal sound or whatever. That's
Okay. I've never done that with footsteps. I used to separate toe and heel, and then decided that was way too much work for something that still kind of sounds just as good with both of those sounds put together.
Yeah, you're like 20 years ahead of your time.
Well, apparently not, because I separated toe and heel because that was the suggestion of a class that I was in.
Okay.
But I do that for like things like gunshots where it's a more important sound,
Right.
I guess, is
More
kind of my
repetitive.
reasoning,
That
and
makes sense.
potentially more repetitive. So like in this case, I've got the high sounds, the low sounds, which kind of sounds very very the same out of those speakers, and then the mids,
Yeah,
which are actually kind of the low.
Yeah, that sounds like a low. We probably don't have the right audio setup to really appreciate them here anyway, but am I right in understanding then that what you're showing me is that the way that things are separated, assets are separated in the audio field now are organized in a more frequency-based hierarchy rather than the material interaction?
That one is more dependent on who you talk to. I separate mine. For me, it depends on the sound. Like I have the gunshot, which is just for a particular gun is going to be the shine, the boom, the body, or high, mid, low. And is how I like to think about it because it makes my brain hurt less.
So
then I've got like the impact sounds for what that bullet is hitting, separated by material, and I've got my footsteps separated by material.
Okay. So my specific question about that was, how does the randomization apply? And I feel like I can project that answer based on what you just said, but just for confirmation, then it's not, since it's separating things by frequency, is the randomization that you had mentioned at the beginning that comes into play there just a pitch modification to the individual frequency sounds? Pat wants to talk.
Pat wants to talk. Why don't you go ahead?
No, you would probably be better at answering.
Okay. There are two answers to this. The randomization, and I didn't really talk about this much. Random containers, which is there are 3 copies of my high sounds, and 3 copies of my mid sounds, and 3 copies of my low sounds. And every single time this event gets called, it picks a random one of each of those to mix together.
Okay.
And then on top of that, there is also random pitch shifting.
Hardcore.
Yeah.
Cool.
Do each of the different sections get randomly pitch shifted independently?
In this particular case, I have the whole mix of the gunshot pitch shifted, but in each of the situations, both Wise and Unreal, you can randomly pitch shift each individual element. I just chose not to do that this time.
Okay. So, okay, cool. So, awesome. So that, if you were to minimize that whole system, you could essentially just take 3 sounds for each of the 3, what are essentially categories for what compose a sound effect in this system.
Mm-hmm.
And each one individually could be randomized in pitch.
Right.
And
Yeah.
basically, just out of those three, you could get.
If you wanted to use less assets, and that's definitely a way that you could do it, is you could just randomize the pitch. One of the extra plugins that you can buy in Wwise is actually specifically a plugin for taking a single sound and then breaking out the grains in the sound to more or less rearrange them in such a way that you can take one sound and split it into several. Which, yeah, it's a lot. Granted, in that case...
Tell me how that works in pixels.
In waffles.
Any other questions?
When you said there's 3 copies, is it 3 variations or 3 of the exact same copy?
No, well, technically, technically, and here, let me open this up. Technically, this is one file that has, come on, stop it, that has several variations within it, and what I've done is just made copies of that file, but shifted where it's playing.
Okay.
Does that save you? Do you know if that saves you a footprint in memory?
I believe it does. I believe I'm willing to. I'm not. I can't guarantee that.
I think
it's definitely taking up more space because I'm not using up the whole thing.
Maybe before compiling, but I think an SDK that was built for this would probably be able to identify that it was coming from the same and then not duplicate the asset when it built.
Yeah, that part I don't know.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
That's kind of a technical question or technical aspect, but sorry,
I don't think it would duplicate it, would it?
I don't think it would do because it's technically the same thing. It's just a different reference. That's how it's doing it in Wwise. I don't know what it's deciding to do when it sends the information to Unreal.
It's similar to animation because some people will animate characters and produce an individual animation file for each animation, and some people will produce an animation for a character in one long animation. So it does all in individual sequences along a singular timeline.
Interesting.
And then break up the animations after the fact once they import it in the engine.
Okay.
So it's kind of a good analog for me to understand it.
Yeah, I wish I had the answer to that, but again, not much in the way of information on there.
No, that's totally. That's interesting to me. I wouldn't have thought to do audio in a similar fashion.
This is something
Even
also.
It's not really a true analog.
Theoretically, you could do an Unreal, but it would require knowing exactly the millisecond to where each instance of the sound is played.
Yeah.
And that is just kind of sounds like a huge pain in the butt.
Yeah, Brian can speak to that, I think. At least in music.
I mean, I'm just using separate audio files.
Any other questions?
Timing.
Does Wwise have any capability for doing low latency audio?
Low latency audio? In what fashion do you mean?
Trying to have a sound effect or piece of music or something execute as quickly as possible after you tell it to execute.
Telling it to like a.
I mean, basically, just turning the audio buffer rate.
Right.
Like, can you turn the audio buffer way down?
Yes, but it's not something I've played with,
Okay.
so I can't really speak much to it. Yeah, they have like a lot of priority settings, especially if you are worried about the resources your computer is using up at runtime. You can set a limit to the number of voices and then set the priority to those voices so that you can tell it which ones you want to play first and which ones you want it to kill first if you have too many voices, and how many to then mute but commit to memory so that when those voices come back it can pull it back quicker without having to replay it.
So you can control what's stored in memory versus what's played dynamically.
Sort of. You can control how it determines the priority of that.
Yeah.
I've played. They call it virtual voicing, and voice limits. So like you can set a voice limit of, I don't want any more than 25 sounds to play, and here's what I want to have happen when you reach that limit, and here are the voices I want you to kill when you reach that limit.
Yeah.
Here are the voices I want you to send to a virtual voice, which is essentially like it's not going to play it until it becomes a more relevant voice. Like there's space freed up so that it'll then go back to playing that voice again.
So maybe not caching, but puts it in the voice.
Yeah, basically. And then you can do that based on volume as well. So like if something gets way too quiet, you can either kill it or you can send it to a virtual voice until the volume goes back up.
Sounds like a nightmare to look at, so I hope you don't show me an example of this.
I-
might have like
There's-
a pretty easy interface.
It's a relatively easy interface. It's just not something I understand all that much yet. So like if I go to gunshots and I go to not conversion, position, RTPC states, advanced settings, and you can do this for each individual object too. So I can limit sound instances and say I just want 10 instances of this voice to ever be playing at a time.
And that applies to all the children beneath that group.
Yes.
So everything under gunshots.
Everything
on
on-
play 10 gunshots at
10 of those sounds, period. So everything within that folder, it'll only allow 10 voices in total.
So can you click on the parent folder for the entire project and limit things like that would be
Oh,
inherent?
here's the master audio bus. Yes. You can also limit things for the entire project.
Okay, and that'll basically, okay, I think I can, yeah.
You
Cool,
can do that
that's
in
cool.
Unreal too.
What's that?
You can do this in Unreal too.
That I didn't get to look into, but I imagine that exists. I just don't. I didn't get that far for Unreal.
Cool.
Okay.
That's awesome. Thank
Yeah.
you, Tim.